All right, so I'm Dylan.
I'm Jeffrey.
I'm Vita. So today we're gonna do the weekly assignment of Econ.
The week two research assignment.
Yeah, week 2 research assignment. So the first question, what is Newmark's position to start on how the profession interprets the research on the employment effects of minimum wage? So with the same data presented in papers, people could still find different ways to interpret the evidence on how minimum wage affects employment rates in the United States. I think that's how Newmark focuses on his introduction of this article. The second question, describe the empirical challenge in trying to estimate the effect of a minimum wage change on employment. I think it's for Dylan.
Okay, so I think generally there's no consensus on evidence and claims of the effects of minimum wage and unemployment, whether it's adverse or non-existent. In fact, advocates on either side of the argument stress different arguments and pieces of evidence. So that is the empirical challenge. So number 3, in your own words, why is there no discussion here or in the popular press or among advocates about what the optimal minimum wage should be? And what does that tell you about where the $15 national wage came from?
All right, I'll tackle this one, Dylan. So from the article, I think it's easy to tell that it's hard for advocates of either side to even agree on what the evidence states about this relationship between minimum wage and employment rate. For example, Riker asserts that, quote, the act will have minimal to no adverse effects on employment and that they will have substantial positive dynamic effects on the lowest wage areas of the US, while Clemens argues that, quote, several strands of research arrive regularly at the conclusion that high minimum wage reduce opportunities for disadvantaged individuals. So as you can see, these are two very contradicting ideas. So since researchers can't even come to a conclusion on the effects of raising minimum wage, they couldn't determine what effects lowering or increasing minimum wage will have. Thus, this shows that the $15 minimum wage is more of a personal preference from the lower class and the workers than it is based on anything methodical or worked out. Okay, so the next question states that how does this paper address the concern that it is cherry picking evidence in order to present its findings on what we know about the minimum wage? I'll do this one again. So the database included in this research is drawn from the estimated conclusions from all of the other author studies. The author clearly states that he, quote, carefully read the papers we include to try to extract the author's main or preferred estimate from each study. They have a specific process for determining this main point, starting at finding the paper's conclusion estimates in terms of elasticities. Then if this method doesn't work, he reads the description of the paper's table, then captures the estimates of contributions from the paper. The author also stated that they would write an email to the authors to confirm their study. These emails were neutral, and he even included a sample in his paper as to what he wrote in the email to show us that it was in fact neutral, and we checked it was neutral. So the next question is, given what you understand about the problem of p-hacking and publication bias, what might you conclude about the results from the group of papers that actually was published as compared to those that were not? And how would that alter our understanding of the impacts of the minimum wage? So luckily, I know a lot about this as well, so I'm going to take this one as well. This means that a group of paper that was published actually has data that backs up the author's viewpoints. Because if all the data refuted the author's original point of view, then they would just scrap the paper. They wouldn't publish it if it contradicted with what they said before or what they believed in. Additionally, the data can be filtered thoroughly, so only those data that support the author's point of view are used. Publication bias makes the author select an unfair amount of data that will support their point. Okay, next question. Most papers are published to produce a finding. That is not this one. What this paper purports to do is to summarize what the professional peer-reviewed literature understands about a subject. In this case, the employment effects versus the minimum wage. How does this paper summarize the state of the profession's knowledge on the minimum wage? How does this compare with the New York Times version of the work?
All right, so basically, this paper summarizes the state of the profession's knowledge on the minimum wage by claiming that most academic writing on a U.S. research evidence gives the impression that even where there is some evidence of negative employment effects, we really cannot reach any conclusions or consensus. As a comparison, the New York Times article that I found published by the author Paul Krugman has stated that, on the other hand, there's just no evidence at all that is raising minimum wage cost jobs, at least when the starting point is as low as it is in modern America. So the next question, what is a meta-analysis and how is this paper different?
I think meta-analysis, it focuses on the average and the distribution of the estimates, which in this case is the average elasticity of employment rate based on the minimum wage. So from observing its variation and central tendency, we can summarize the whole literature covered in this study. Yeah. And describe what the authors had to do to find out of the peer-reviewed scholarly papers that have been published on this topic. So I think the author found all the published paper relative to this topic in the Newmark Worcester in 2007, and also in the Wolfson and Bellman, which covers the relevant papers in the last 15 years. And the author also supplemented all the papers in the Google Scholarly with the keyword minimum wage from 1992 to 2020. So if the paper estimated employment effects of the minimum wage and provides some like elasticity estimate, it was retained. The paper aims to present the distribution of the main findings of the entire literature. So it asks reporting simple tables with simple averages, describe the way they present the data, and use your own words to interpret the distributions.
Okay, so as for the distribution, it describes the data by classifying the population to different categories and stating the proportion of employment elasticity. So the numbers show that 79.3% have a decrease in unemployment rate, 55.4% have a great decrease, and 49.7% have a moderate decrease. So the next question, describe one or more of the questions that the authors asked to examine the generality and veracity of their findings. So some of the questions that the author has asked to examine the generality and veracity of their findings, including the questions the author has emailed to the authors of every study included in this paper. Pretty much asking them to report the preferred estimates or results from their study. So the first question is, what estimated elasticity from your paper best captures its core conclusion? Put differently, if you had to reduce the findings of this paper to a single estimate, what would it be? The second question is, if you believe it is impossible to capture your overall conclusion in a single estimated elasticity, please repeat this information for other estimated elasticities you believe are needed to capture your core conclusions. And last but not least, the third question was, if you responded with additional estimates in question 2, please briefly explain why additional estimates are required to capture your core conclusions. So the next question is, labor for labor substitution is thought to be a possible explanation for why studies do not show decreases in headcounts and hours worked. Explain what this means.
Okay, so the strong labor for labor substitution present in the country means that the statistics will display a, quote, relatively weak overall employment effects for an industry, but larger job losses for specific groups of workers in that industry. This effect will hide the large unemployment rate within industries, but rather if you look at a specific group of workers, like the unskilled workers, unemployment increase will be predominant. So for our 12th question, young adult negative employment outcomes are worse than for teens. Why is this important?
So young adults includes, like the young adults is the group includes teens too, but the outcomes are like worse, meaning that the result is not only limited within these two groups, it's affecting like more people than we think.
It's also important because teens have the highest percentage of minimum wages, while young adults will have relatively the same wage if minimum wage increases, as stated in the article. This means that those with higher wages, the young adults, have a higher chance of being unemployed, while those with the minimum wage or below, the teens, will still have their jobs. However, they will still be paid very little, which is the minimum wage.
Great response, Jeffrey. So that marks the end of our week 2 research assignment, and thank you for watching this.
Thank you.